Welcome, history enthusiasts, to the debut episode of the History Horizon, where we embark on a thrilling expedition through the annals of time. I'm your host, Anshuman, and today we are diving headfirst into the epic tale of a warrior, a strategist, and a legend whose name has resonated across centuries: Alexander the Great. Get ready to be transported to an era of conquests, kingdoms, and the indomitable spirit of a leader whose story unfolds like a captivating saga. Our journey begins now with Conqueror's legacy, the unraveling tale of Alexander the Great. On a cold winter night, a gentle breeze filtered through the curtains of a majestic bedroom in a Greek palace. The light from the lamps that adorned this room played on the sleeping silhouettes of the occupants. A dark-haired muscular Greek and his beautiful blonde-haired, blue-eyed wife. The Greek was tossing and turning in the throes of a fitful sleep. In his dreams, he sealed his wife's womb with wax, and the seal had the likeness of a lion on it. In the morning, when the advisor and seer Aristander heard of the dream, he made a prediction, a fateful prediction. My king, your wife, my queen, is pregnant and is going to give birth to a boy who will have the strength and fortitude of a lion. It is said that the day the baby was born, the temple of goddess Artemis burned down because Artemis was busy with the momentous birth of the baby boy and couldn't reach the temple in time to save it. The king and queen to whom this baby was born were King Philip II of Macedonia and Queen Olympia, and the baby boy was none other than Alexander III of Macedonia, better known as Alexander the Great. Alexander III was born in Pella, the capital of the Kingdom of Macedon, on the sixth day of the ancient Greek month of Hecatombion, which probably corresponds to 20th of July 356 BC, although the exact date is uncertain. He was the son of the erstwhile king of Macedon, Philip II, and his fourth wife, Olympia, daughter of Neoptolemus I, king of Epirus. Although Philip had 7 or 8 wives, Olympia was his principal wife for some time, likely because she gave birth to Alexander. Alexander was being influenced by his parents very differently. In his early years, Alexander was tutored by the strict Leonidas, a relative of his mother, and Lysimachus of Acarnania. Alexander was raised in the manner of noble Macedonian youths, learning to read, play the lyre, ride, fight, and hunt. When Alexander was 10 years old, a trader from Thessaly brought Philip a horse, which he offered to sell for 13 talents. The horse refused to be mounted, and Philip ordered it away. Alexander, however, detected the horse's fear of its own shadow, asked to tame the horse, and eventually managed to. Plutarch stated that Philip, overjoyed at his display of courage and ambition, kissed his son tearfully, declaring, "My boy, you must find a kingdom big enough for your ambitions. Macedon is too small for you," and bought the horse for him. Alexander named it Bucephalus, meaning ox head. Bucephalus carried Alexander as far as India. When the animal died, most probably because of old age according to Plutarch, at age 30, Alexander named a city after him, Bucephala. When Alexander was 13, Philip began to search for a tutor and considered such academics as Isocrates and Speusippus, the latter offering to resign from his stewardship of the academy to take up the post. In the end, Philip chose Aristotle and provided the Temple of Nymphs, Mieza, as a classroom. In return for teaching Alexander, Philip agreed to rebuild Aristotle's hometown of Stagira, which Philip had razed, and to repopulate it by buying and freeing the ex-citizens who were slaves or pardoning those who were in exile. Alexander showed to have a lot of potential from a very early age and was taught by the best teachers. The subjects that were taught to Alexander by the famous thinker Aristotle were medicine, literature, philosophy, but most importantly, ethics and politics. It was also clear that Alexander was an intellectual person, as he showed particular interest in sciences and literature. When he was 16, Philip II left him in charge of the Macedonian military while he went to conquer Byzantium. During this time, Thracian Maedi tribe went against Macedonia, but Alexander responded quickly and drove them from their territory, and after taking over, named the city Alexandropolis. Upon Philip's return, Alexander was dispatched with a small force to subdue the revolts in southern Thrace. Campaigning against the Greek city of Perinthus, Alexander reportedly saved his father's life. While Philip was occupied in Thrace, Alexander was ordered to muster an army for a campaign in southern Greece. Concerned that the other Greek states might intervene, Alexander made it look as though he was preparing to attack Illyria instead. During this turmoil, the Illyrians invaded Macedonia only to be repelled by Alexander. Philip and his army joined his son in 338 BC. As Philip marched south, his opponents blocked him near Chaeronea in Boeotia. During the ensuing Battle of Chaeronea, Philip commanded the right wing and Alexander the left, accompanied by a group of Philip's trusted generals. According to the ancient sources, the two sides fought bitterly for some time. Philip deliberately commanded his troops to retreat, counting on the untested Athenian hoplites to follow, thus breaking their line. Alexander was the first to break the Theban lines, followed by Philip's generals. Having damaged the enemy's cohesion, Philip ordered his troops to press forward and quickly routed them. With the Athenians lost, the Thebans were surrounded. Left to fight alone, they were defeated. After the victory at Chaeronea, Philip and Alexander marched unopposed into the Peloponnese, welcomed by all cities. However, when they reached Sparta, they were refused, but did not resort to war. At Corinth, Philip established a Hellenic alliance, modeled on the old anti-Persian alliance of the Greco-Persian Wars, which included almost all Greek city-states except Sparta. Philip was then named hegemon, often translated as supreme commander of this league, known by modern scholars as the League of Corinth, and announced his plans to attack the Persian Empire. At the wedding of Cleopatra, whom Philip fell in love with and married, her uncle Attalus, who was quite drunk by this time, expressed his desire that the Macedonians would implore the gods to give them a lawful successor to the kingdom by his niece. This so irritated Alexander that, throwing one of the cups at his head, Alexander said, "You villain, what am I then, a bastard?" Then Philip, taking Attalus' side, rose up and would have run his son through, but by good fortune for them both, either in his over-hasty rage or because of the wine he had drunk, slipped and fell down on the floor. At which Alexander reproachfully insulted him and said, "See there, the man who makes preparations to pass out of Europe and into Asia, overturned in passing from one seat to another." In 337 BC, Alexander fled Macedon with his mother, dropping her off with her brother, King Alexander I of Epirus in Dodona, capital of the Molossians. He continued to Illyria, where he sought refuge with one or more Illyrian kings, perhaps with Glaucius, and was treated as a guest, despite having defeated them in battle a few years before. However, it appears Philip never intended to disown his politically and militarily trained son. Accordingly, Alexander returned to Macedon after 6 months due to the efforts of a family friend Demaratus, who mediated between the two parties. In 336 BC, Philip II was assassinated during marriage ceremonies by one of his guards. There is some speculation as to the true reasons and people who organized the assassination. But there were several enemies who were set against Philip and his diplomacy. When Alexander became the lawful king, he took care of everyone who he thought could be a threat to his ruling. Because news of Philip's death had been circulating, some tribes decided to take power into their own hands. Alexander acted quickly and took matters into his own hand by making them surrender. He then organized a congress and made sure that Greeks were on his side. Thus, in year 335 BC, he went north and defeated Tripoli and Amphipolis. Because his reputation was yet to be made, the king of Illyria, Cletus, and King Glaucius did not think of him as a threat and went to battle but were defeated. His conquest of the north was referred to as the Balkan conquest, and after it successfully finished, Alexander set out to conquer the Persian Empire. When he marched out, his army consisted of approximately 50,000 soldiers, and his fame was already known in the region. After the Battle of Granicus, several Persian cities surrendered without a battle, and Alexander proceeded further. The Battle of Issus occurred in southern Anatolia on 5th of November 333 BC between the Hellenic League led by Alexander the Great and the Achaemenid Empire led by Darius III. It was the second great battle of Alexander's conquest of Asia and the first encounter between Darius III and Alexander the Great. But even though Darius had a larger army, he was defeated and forced to escape even before the battle was over. After the battle, Alexander continued to pursue Darius and eventually was proclaimed the king of Asia with ownership of Syria and almost all of the Levant. In 332 BC, he went on to attack Tyre, and the battle turned out to be a hard one. This did not stop him, and after defeating and killing all men capable of military service, he went towards Egypt. Since he was already well known in the region, many cities surrendered, and upon his arrival in Egypt, he was seen as a liberator. Gaza was one of the cities that did not capitulate, and Alexander was forced to fight. The defenses of the city were well equipped, and the Macedonian king had to resort to siege. After 3 attempts to take the city and a wound to a shoulder that was rather serious, Alexander took Gaza. Alexander then went on to Mesopotamia, leaving Egypt. Again, he was met with Darius and defeated him. After capturing Babylon, he took Susa, Persepolis, and went through the Persian gates. This was the time when Alexander became the great king. But his desire to conquer more lands did not die down. As he was an intellectual and well-educated person, he would always have philosophers, engineers, and historians present. This ensured the proper recording of the events and any possible advice. It is important to note that there were 2 plots against his life. The first involved one of his officers not being able to notify Alexander, and so Macedonian king killed the officer and his son to prevent any vengeance. Another plot happened during his Central Asian campaign and involved people out of his royal surroundings. In years 327 and 326 BC, Alexander went on to conquer the Indian subcontinent. The Battle of Hydaspes, also known as Battle of Jhelum or First Battle of Jhelum, was fought between Alexander the Great and the Indian king Porus in May of 326 BC. It took place on the banks of the Hydaspes River in Punjab as part of Alexander's Indian campaign. In what was possibly their most costly engagement, the Macedonian army secured a decisive victory over the Pauravas and captured Porus. Large areas of Punjab were subsequently absorbed into the Macedonian Empire. Porus was reinstated as the region's ruler after Alexander, having developed a newfound respect for the fierce resistance put up by Porus and his army, appointed him as a satrap. In spite of close Indian surveillance, Alexander's decision to cross the monsoon-swollen Hydaspes in order to catch Porus's army in the flank has been referred to as one of his masterpieces in combat. The Macedonians' engagement with the Indians at Hydaspes remains a very significant historical event with regard to the wars of Alexander the Great, as it resulted in the exposure of Greek political and cultural influences to the Indian subcontinent, thereby yielding works such as Greco-Buddhist art, which would continue to affect Greeks and Indians for centuries to come, and was considered one of the fiercest battles ever fought by Alexander. The casualties taken by the Greeks and the unfamiliar weather and terrain conditions of the West Indian continent were a bit much for the battle-weary army. Much of the army and many of Alexander's close confidants didn't want to face much bigger Indian armies that lay beyond the Hyphasis River and wanted to return to their homeland after more than a decade of constant fighting and march. After much convincing, Alexander agreed to return. While going back, Alexander the Great has realized that many of his military leaders who were left to their own devices misbehaved, so several executions followed. He then held a big feast between Macedonians and Persians, which was meant to unite the two nations. There were many more plans that Alexander the Great wanted to accomplish, but his death in 323 BC prevented him from any more conquering. Historically, there is some controversy as to the true causes of his death, and there are descriptions of both natural causes and assassination. By some versions, he has died of either meningitis, bacterial virus, or natural causes that were accelerated by his lifestyle of heavy drinking and battles. Some historians propose that he was poisoned by the wine that he drank or the water from the river Styx. After his death, the empire that he created fell apart. As we wrap up this episode, consider this just the opening chapter of our exploration of Alexander the Great's incredible journey. This has been a glimpse into the life of a visionary leader, but there's so much more to discover. The epic battles, the strategic brilliance, and the lasting impact on civilizations. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes where we delve deeper into the conquests that shaped empires and the intriguing facets of Alexander's legacy. Until then, thank you for joining us on the History Horizon. And remember, the past is just a heartbeat away. Subscribe, follow, and get ready for more riveting tales from the pages of history. This is Anshuman, signing off until our next adventure.